Daniel adjusted his tie for the third time, the knot never sitting right no matter how hard he tried. He caught his reflection in the bedroom mirror and sighed. Corporate parties were never his thing, but Elena had been insistent. "You can't keep hiding in the background, Daniel," she said, fastening her earrings with quick, precise movements. "Richard doesn't just throw parties. He throws opportunities." Daniel gave a half-smile that never reached his eyes. Opportunities for who? Him or us? Elena didn't answer. She slipped on her heels and smoothed the emerald dress over her figure. She looked radiant, the kind of radiant that made Daniel's stomach twist with both pride and unease. The drive to Richard's mansion stretched on in silence. Elena tapped her phone constantly, her face lit by the screen's glow, while Daniel gripped the wheel tighter with every mile. He already knew enough about Richard, his larger-than-life charm, the way women seemed to orbit him, the subtle fear in men who worked under him. By the time they reached the long driveway, lined with imported cars glistening under spotlights, Daniel felt small. He parked between two black SUVs, suddenly aware of his modest suit, his two worn shoes. "Elena," he muttered, "do we really have to stay long?" She turned to him with a patient smile that felt practiced. "We'll stay as long as we need to. This matters, Daniel. Richard matters." The words lingered uncomfortably. Inside, the mansion was alive with sound. Music floated through crystal chandeliers, glasses clinked, and laughter rose in polished bursts. Waiters in black uniforms weaved between clusters of guests, offering champagne on silver trays. Daniel followed Elena as she navigated the room with ease, greeting colleagues he barely recognized. His chest tightened when he noticed how easily she slipped into that world, her hand on someone's arm, her laugh light and musical, her eyes scanning the room like she belonged. Daniel, meanwhile, hovered on the edges. His gaze snagged on Richard across the room, tall, confident, his smile sharp as a blade. Even from a distance, Richard had a presence that demanded attention. Guests leaned toward him instinctively, as though caught in his orbit. When Richard finally noticed Elena, his expression shifted. Not surprise, but recognition. "Ah, Elena!" Richard's voice cut through the music when he approached. His hand lingered too long when he shook hers. "And you must be Daniel." Daniel nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the invitation." Richard waved it off, eyes flicking briefly back to Elena before settling on Daniel again. "Please, it's just Richard tonight. I like to keep things informal outside the office." Still, Daniel felt the weight of authority in every word. Elena leaned in slightly, her tone brighter than usual. "Your home is incredible. I don't think I've ever seen so many people from the company in one place." Richard chuckled. "The secret to business is simple. Work hard. And when you play, play harder." Daniel forced a laugh, but it came out flat. His wife was glowing in the light of Richard's attention, and Daniel felt like a shadow in comparison. He drifted to the bar while Elena and Richard slipped into conversation. From the corner of his eye, Daniel watched them. Too close, leaning in, exchanging looks that unsettled him. The bartender poured whiskey into his glass. Daniel swirled it slowly, watching the amber liquid catch the light. He tried to shake off the thought, but the unease clung to him like smoke. A voice in the back of his mind whispered that the night wasn't going to end the way he imagined. And as Richard's laughter rose above the music and Elena's smile stretched just a little too wide, Daniel realized the party had only just begun. The party was in full bloom by the time Daniel finished his second drink. Golden light spilled from chandeliers, scattering across polished marble floors. Everywhere he looked, there was movement. Men in tailored suits shaking hands, women draped in silk laughing too loudly, the constant shuffle of servers gliding past with champagne flutes that never seemed to empty. But despite the spectacle, Daniel's focus narrowed to one corner of the room. Elena stood beside Richard, her hand brushing the edge of a wine glass, her posture elegant and relaxed. She was speaking, no, laughing, at something Richard had said. Her laughter wasn't the polite kind she often used with colleagues. It was fuller, softer, almost intimate. And the way her eyes lingered on him afterward, Daniel caught it. Just a second too long, just a little too warm. He told himself not to overthink it. Elena was always charming at parties. It was one of the reasons he admired her. She knew how to make people feel seen. But admiration had begun to blur into something darker now, something heavier. He glanced down at his drink, then back at the two of them. Richard leaned closer, saying something Daniel couldn't hear. Elena tilted her head, her hair brushing her shoulder as she smiled. Daniel clenched his jaw. A waiter appeared at his elbow. "Another whiskey, sir?" Daniel shook his head. "No, just water." His throat was too dry to admit the truth. Alcohol was sharpening his jealousy, not dulling it. He drifted through the crowd, nodding at faces he barely recognized, pretending to listen to a junior manager explaining stock options. His mind was elsewhere, circling back to Elena and Richard. Every time he stole a glance, the same unease washed over him. Their body language too synchronized, their amusement too private. The chandeliers above glimmered like stars, yet Daniel felt the air growing colder. At one point, Elena excused herself from Richard to greet another couple. Daniel exhaled in relief. But even then, she turned back over her shoulder, searching for Richard's eyes, as if tethered by something invisible. Richard noticed. His smirk deepened. Daniel felt the moment like a knife twisting in his gut. Near the grand staircase, a live band played a smooth jazz number. Couples swayed, their movements slow and deliberate. Daniel tried to lose himself in the music, but the rhythm only reminded him of how Elena's body once moved with his, how her smile used to belong to him alone. And now it looked like a performance meant for another man. "Daniel!" Elena's voice suddenly rang out across the room. For a brief second, he felt seen. She waved him over, her expression bright. But as he approached, he noticed the subtle glance she exchanged with Richard first, quick and knowing. It was small, almost invisible, but not to Daniel. The warmth drained from the moment. "Yes?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Richard was just telling me about the new project," Elena said. Her words were casual, but her tone carried that same rehearsed enthusiasm she often reserved for strangers she wanted to impress. Richard clapped Daniel on the shoulder, his touch heavy, authoritative. "Big things coming, Daniel. You'll want to keep close. Promotions aren't far off for those who can deliver." Daniel forced a smile, but his stomach churned. He excused himself quickly, muttering something about needing air. Out on the balcony, the night air struck him sharp and cool. Below, the city stretched out in glittering silence. Daniel gripped the railing, staring at the streets far beneath, wondering if he was imagining things. Was it all in his head? Or had something between Elena and Richard already crossed an unseen line? Inside, laughter erupted again. Elena's laugh, distinct, floating through the open doors. Daniel turned, his eyes catching her silhouette against the golden light, leaning in just a fraction too close to Richard. And that was when it hit him. If he stayed silent, the poison of suspicion would only spread deeper. The next time he caught their voices, he knew he would have to listen. The night air cooled Daniel's skin, but it did little to settle the fire in his chest. He lingered on the balcony longer than necessary, forcing himself to breathe slowly, to imagine he was overthinking. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to step back inside and see Elena smiling at him, not at Richard. But when he finally re-entered the glowing heat of the mansion, his eyes betrayed him, seeking her out instantly. And there she was, at the far end of the room near the staircase. Richard had leaned close, his head angled toward her ear. Elena tilted toward him, listening. It wasn't businesslike, it was softer, private. Daniel's steps faltered, his heart thudded. He moved closer, weaving between groups of guests. Their words were muffled at first, drowned beneath the laughter, the band's rhythm, the clinking of glasses. But as Daniel neared the shadow of the grand staircase, their voices sharpened in fragments. "Not here." Elena's voice, low, tense, but tinged with something Daniel couldn't define. Richard's reply was smoother, a whisper draped in charm. "You worry too much. He won't notice." Daniel froze. His breath caught. He ducked slightly, pretending to examine one of the gilded portraits lining the wall, his ears strained for every syllable. Elena exhaled sharply. "You don't understand. If he finds out—" Richard cut her off with a chuckle that was far too intimate. "Let me worry about Daniel. You just be patient. Trust me. Trust me." The words slammed into Daniel with brutal force. His knuckles whitened around the glass in his hand. It couldn't mean what it sounded like. It had to be about work, about a project, about something harmless. But Elena's silence stretched, heavy, as though her agreement was carved in the space between them. Finally she whispered, barely audible, "Not tonight." The seed planted. Paranoia took root. Daniel retreated before they could notice him, slipping back into the crowd. His pulse raced so loudly he thought people might hear it. He avoided their eyes, their laughter, everything, and pushed his way toward the bar again. The whiskey glass shook slightly in his grip. He gulped it down, hoping the burn would erase what he'd just overheard. But the words replayed like an echo chamber. "He won't notice. Trust me. Not tonight. Not tonight. What about tomorrow?" Daniel's thoughts spiraled. Images flooded his mind. Elena sneaking into Richard's office, secret meetings, whispered calls when he wasn't home, the laugh she'd given Richard, the way her eyes had lingered. Suddenly, every moment, every look, became evidence of something he didn't want to name. A hand touched his shoulder. He flinched. "Daniel," Elena's voice said, too calm, too composed. She stood beside him, her expression soft. "Are you all right? You look pale." He forced a smile, brittle at the edges. "Just needed some air." Her gaze flickered briefly, as though gauging how much he knew. Then she slipped her arm through his, guiding him back toward the crowd. "Don't disappear on me like that. You know how awkward it is when people ask where you've gone." Her tone carried a strange mix, affectionate in sound but controlling in weight. Daniel felt the leash tighten. Across the room, Richard raised his glass toward them, a silent toast. His smile was sharp, knowing. Daniel's stomach churned. He nodded stiffly, but inside, a storm had begun. If there was truth behind those whispers, if Elena and Richard were hiding something, he would uncover it. As Elena leaned in to whisper something to another guest, Daniel's eyes stayed locked on Richard. The seed of paranoia had already sprouted. And when they returned home that night, Daniel knew the mask of polite conversation would crack. The drive home was a silence broken only by the hum of tires against asphalt. Elena scrolled absently through her phone, her face lit by its glow. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, his knuckles pale, his jaw locked. He wanted to speak, to ask, to demand, but every word he rehearsed turned sour before it left his lips. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Elena slipped out of the car quickly, her heels clicking against the pavement as she walked ahead of him. She didn't wait, didn't glance back. Inside, the house felt smaller than usual, the air dense with everything unsaid. Daniel loosened his tie and watched as Elena hung her coat neatly, her movements precise, calculated. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Daniel asked, his tone deceptively casual. She shot him a look over her shoulder. "It was a work party, Daniel. Enjoyment isn't really the point." He followed her into the kitchen, the tension between them thickening with each step. You seem to be enjoying Richard's company just fine. Elena paused, a wine glass in her hand. She turned slowly, eyes sharp. Is that what this is about? Daniel leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. I couldn't help but notice you two seemed close. Her laugh was brittle. Close? Daniel, he's your boss. I was being polite. That's called networking. Maybe if you tried it once in a while, you'd understand. The sting of her words cut deep. Networking doesn't usually involve whispering in corners, he said quietly. Her face hardened. Were you eavesdropping? Daniel flinched. The accusation was sharper than her tone. I wasn't. I just overheard. Of course you did. She set the glass down too hard, the sound ringing through the room. This is what you do, isn't it? You invent stories in your head because you can't stand the thought that someone else might find me interesting. That's not fair. Hi, his voice cracked. I know what I heard. What you heard, Elena snapped, was a conversation you didn't understand. But you twisted it into something ugly because you're jealous, because you've always been insecure. Daniel swallowed hard, his chest tightening. Elena, I'm not insecure. I'm your husband, and I'm watching you slip away from me. For a fleeting second, her expression softened, then hardened again, like glass under pressure. You're imagining things. You always have. You're so busy doubting me, doubting yourself, doubting everything, that you don't see the real problem. And what's that? He whispered. You, she said coldly. The word hung in the air like a blade. He stared at her, searching for some sign of the woman he'd married. So this is my fault. My fault that Richard looks at you like... Like what? She cut in, stepping closer, her eyes flashing. Like I'm worth something? Like I belong somewhere more than this little house and your constant paranoia? Daniel's breath caught. It wasn't just irritation anymore. It was contempt. You've changed, he murmured. No, Elena corrected, her voice low but seething. I've just stopped pretending. The silence between them stretched, unbearable. Daniel's mind reeled, caught between anger and grief. He wanted to fight back, to scream, but the weight of her words pressed him down. Finally, she turned away, grabbing her glass again. I'm going to bed. You should sleep too. Maybe in the morning you'll realize how ridiculous this all sounds. Her footsteps echoed up the stairs, leaving Daniel alone in the kitchen, surrounded by shadows. He pressed his palms to the counter, his body trembling. Every sentence she'd spoken replayed in his head, over and over, like shards of glass cutting deeper with each pass. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was insecure. Maybe he was paranoid. But then he remembered Rick Hard's whisper, he won't notice. Trust me. Daniel's chest tightened. No, he thought. He wasn't imagining this. Something was happening in the dark, just out of his reach. And if Elena wouldn't tell him the truth, he'd have to find it himself. The house was silent, but Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Elena's words replaying in his mind like a cruel mantra. You're the problem. Beside him, Elena breathed steadily, her back turned, as if even in sleep she was choosing to face away. Daniel shifted restlessly, his chest tight, his thoughts churning. When the bathroom light clicked on and the shower hissed to life, he sat up. The sound of running water was both a shield and a dare. His gaze slid to her nightstand where her phone rested, the device she guarded more fiercely than her own purse. He told himself not to do it. He told himself he'd find nothing, that he'd only prove her right. But his legs moved before his conscience could stop him. Daniel picked up the phone, his palms damp. His heart raced as he swiped, the glow burning his eyes in the darkened room. At first it was ordinary. Group chats, family messages, work reminders. His chest loosened for a brief second, hope flickering. Then he saw Richard's name, a thread buried beneath innocuous conversations. He tapped it open, and the world shifted. Can't stop thinking about last night. You drive me insane. He won't notice. Just a few minutes tomorrow. Daniel's pulse hammered. He scrolled further. You looked incredible tonight. Patience. Soon. A promise is a promise. Some messages were cut short, half deleted. Others were full of cryptic words, just enough to carve meaning without exposure. But every line dripped with something intimate, undeniable. One message from Elena froze him entirely. When he looks at me, I feel guilty. Stop making me feel guilty. Richard's reply followed quickly. Then don't feel guilty. Feel alive. Daniel's chest cracked open, rage and grief flooding together until he could hardly breathe. His wife, his Elena, had written those words. She hadn't denied Richard, hadn't rejected him. She had confessed her guilt. And Richard had fed the fire. The phone trembled in Daniel's grip. He wanted to throw it across the room, smash it until the glass cut his skin. Instead, he set it back on the nightstand just as the water shut off. He slipped under the covers again, his body stiff, pretending to sleep. The bathroom door opened and Elena padded softly into the room. The scent of her shampoo lingered as she climbed into bed. Daniel forced his breathing steady, though every part of him burned with the knowledge of betrayal. He wanted to sit up, to confront her, to scream, but the words lodged in his throat like stones. "Daniel?" she whispered after a moment, her voice soft, almost careful. He didn't answer. He couldn't. She turned away again, settling into sleep, while Daniel's eyes stayed open in the dark. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the tick of the clock. Daniel's mind replayed every message, every glance, every whisper. The evidence was there, undeniable. And yet, a small part of him still clung to denial. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's harmless. Maybe it's not what it looks like. But the words came back. Stop making me feel guilty. No, there was no innocence here. By dawn, his eyes burned with sleeplessness. He sat at the kitchen table, gripping a cold cup of coffee, replaying his life like a film unraveling. When had things shifted? When had Elena stopped being his? The phone lay upstairs, silent now, but full of poison. Daniel's grief began to curdle into something heavier, something darker. He would remember every detail. He would replay every moment. He would dig until there was nothing left to deny. And when he closed his eyes, he didn't see Elena as his wife anymore. He saw her as a stranger standing too close to Richard in the golden light of that party. The memory gnawed at him, and he knew he would return to it, searching for every clue he had missed. Morning light spilled weakly through the blinds, but Daniel sat in shadow, hunched at the kitchen table. His untouched coffee had long gone cold. The phone upstairs burned in his memory, its messages etched into his skull. He had proof now, but proof wasn't enough. His mind demanded more. So he closed his eyes and returned to the night of the party, not as he had lived it, but as he now replayed it, frame by frame, every overlooked detail cast in a harsher light. The music had been bright, the laughter louder than the band's jazz melody. Crystal glasses clinked, chandeliers shimmered. He remembered Elena's hand sliding onto his arm when they first entered, her warmth a fleeting comfort. But almost immediately she had slipped away, greeting people with the ease of someone born for such rooms. Richard had been waiting. Daniel could see it now, the way Richard's eyes had followed Elena across the floor before she even noticed him. Their smiles met in the middle, practiced and familiar, not accidental. How had he missed it? He remembered Richard's hand resting lightly against Elena's lower back as he guided her toward a group of guests. A touch subtle enough to seem polite, but lasting just a second too long. Daniel had seen it then, brushed it off. He told himself it was nothing. Richard was a man who touched everyone, a master of charisma. But now, that touch replayed with a new weight, a silent claim made in plain sight. The wine, too. Elena's glass had never been empty. Richard had personally fetched refills, their fingers brushing as he handed it to her. She laughed each time, tipping her head back, her eyes soft. Daniel had thought she was simply enjoying herself. But what if the wine wasn't just generosity? What if it was ritual? A pattern between them, an excuse for intimacy in public. Daniel's heart clenched as he remembered their sudden disappearance. One meows. Moment Elena had been at his side. The next, she was gone. He searched through the crowd for minutes that felt like hours, convincing himself she was mingling. When he finally spotted her again, she was returning from the hallway, Richard just steps behind her. Their faces had been calm, perfectly composed. Too composed. He had told himself they'd simply been discussing work away from the noise. But now the memory twisted. Elena smoothing her hair, Richard's lips curved in a satisfied smile. The hallway behind them had seemed darker than the rest of the house, shadows swallowing whatever had just occurred. Daniel pressed his palms into his eyes, but the images only sharpened. Every detail he'd ignored that night now bloomed into evidence. The way Elena's laughter had rung richer when it was for Richard. The way Richard had leaned in, his voice pitched low, for her ears alone. The way Elena's gaze kept drifting back to him, as though pulled by a magnet, no matter where she stood. And worst of all, that final toast. Richard raising his glass across the room, not to the crowd, not even to Daniel, but to Elena. A private acknowledgement hidden in a public gesture. Elena had lifted her glass in return, the smallest of nods. Daniel had stood there, oblivious, smiling like a fool. He slammed his fist onto the table now, the sound echoing through the empty kitchen. Rage coursed hot through his veins, but beneath it lay something colder, heavier. Shame. How long had he been blind? How long had Elena been slipping away, step by step, while he told himself everything was fine? The party wasn't just a party anymore. It was a map of betrayal, each detail a signpost pointing toward the truth he didn't want to face. Daniel rose unsteadily, pacing the kitchen. His thoughts circled like vultures. He couldn't let it go. He couldn't move on. The evidence wasn't enough. He needed certainty, clarity, confession. The flashbacks wouldn't stop. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, they haunted him even in the quiet of his home. And as the morning stretched into afternoon, Daniel realized something terrifying. He was no longer in control of his thoughts. The night of the party had become a prison, and he was trapped inside it. He gripped the counter, breathing hard. If he couldn't silence the memories, he knew what came next. Obsession. The memories of that night refused to release him. Each detail replayed in sharper, crueler clarity until Daniel could no longer separate recollection from invention. He would close his eyes and hear Elena's laughter echo against the clink of Richard's glass. He would blink and see their eyes locking across a room that no longer existed. What had once been uneasy suspicion now thickened into obsession. At the office, Richard wore his familiar mask of charm. "Morning, Daniel," he said one day with a smile that was too polished, too knowing. His hand clapped Daniel's shoulder, heavy with false warmth. "Don't forget the quarterly reports." The words were mundane, but Daniel heard something else beneath them. A whisper of mockery, as if Richard were reminding him who held power not just in the company, but in his marriage. Daniel forced a tight smile, but his palms were damp. The click of Richard's shoes down the hall left him shaking. Elena, too, had changed. Or perhaps she had always been this way, and he was only seeing it now. She came home later, sometimes with excuses about errands or meetings, her tone clipped when he asked questions. At dinner, she scrolled her phone more than she spoke. When he reached for her hand, she pulled away under the pretense of grabbing her glass. "Are you working late with Richard again?" Daniel had asked once, his voice too sharp. Her eyes had flashed with irritation. Not everything I do is about him. Maybe if you focused on yourself instead of inventing stories, you'd get that promotion you've been chasing for 5 years. The words stung more than he let show. But when she disappeared into the bedroom, leaving him at the table with his untouched plate, the sting hardened into something darker. Nights became unbearable. Sleep was a stranger. Daniel would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts painting scenes he couldn't escape. Elena leaning across Richard's desk, her hair brushing his hand. Richard's voice low, Elena's laugh soft and complicit. He could almost smell the cologne, hear the rustle of fabric. Every imagined detail tightened the knot in his chest. To silence it, he turned to the bottle. At first, just a glass of whiskey before bed, then 2, then 3. Soon the amber burn was his only anchor, the haze the only reprieve from his gnawing mind. But the relief never lasted. Morning came cruelly clear, and the cycle began again. At work, Daniel found himself staring blankly at his computer screen, the words in his reports dissolving into meaningless symbols. Colleagues asked if he was all right. He waved them off, forcing a laugh. But whispers followed him out of conference rooms, and Richard's polite nods seemed sharper, cutting deeper. Everywhere the world looked staged, every smile rehearsed, every gesture hiding some sinister meaning. One night, he came home to find Elena already asleep, her phone charging on the nightstand. He stood in the doorway, watching her steady breathing, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. He wanted to reach for it, to scour it again for messages, for proof. But he couldn't move. His legs trembled, his throat dry. He felt like a stranger in his own home, an intruder in a life that no longer belonged to him. The spiral deepened, days blurred. The city outside seemed colder, louder, its rhythm mocking his unraveling. He avoided friends, ignored calls, withdrew into himself. Everywhere he went, the image of Richard and Elena Shaw dowed him, sitting close in a cafe, laughing in the back of a car, whispering in a dim corridor. He didn't know if the visions were memory, imagination, or madness. And the worst part? He wasn't sure he wanted to know the difference anymore. By the end of the week, Daniel barely recognized the man in the mirror. His eyes were sunken, his jaw unshaven, his shirt creased from nights spent on the couch. He pressed his hands against the sink, leaning in close. "Get a grip," he whispered to his reflection. But the reflection stared back with hollow eyes, unconvinced. Behind him, the sound of Elena's laughter drifted faintly from the living room, soft, distracted, almost careless. Daniel's grip tightened on the sink until his knuckles whitened. His mind screamed, was she texting him right now? Was he waiting for her? The obsession had consumed him, and he knew, with a sick certainty, that something inside him was about to break. The invitation arrived like an omen. Another corporate gathering, smaller, more exclusive, hosted in Richard's private villa on the outskirts of the city. Elena accepted without hesitation. Daniel said nothing, though the silence between them was sharp enough to cut. That night, as he dressed in a pressed shirt that felt like a costume, Daniel told himself he wouldn't drink, wouldn't lose focus. He needed clarity, proof, answers. The villa glowed against the dark hills, lanterns casting golden light over marble floors and glass walls. Music drifted through the air, low and sophisticated. Inside, laughter bubbled, expensive perfume mingling with the scent of wine and roasted meats. Daniel moved through the crowd like a ghost. Every word of small talk slipped past him unheard. His eyes scanned constantly for Elena. She was radiant in a crimson dress, her smile brighter than the chandeliers. Too bright. And beside her, Richard. Always Richard. Daniel's chest tightened. He forced himself to wait, to watch, to see what they would reveal if they thought him blind. Hours blurred, his patience thinning. Then it happened. He saw Elena slip toward the back corridor, her hand brushing Richard's as they passed through the crowd. Subtle, secret, practiced. The air left Daniel's lungs. His body moved before thought could intervene, his feet carrying him after them down the hallway lined with dim sconces. Each step echoed like a countdown. He stopped at a half-open door. Inside, laughter. Hushed, intimate. He pushed it wider, and the world froze. Elena was close to Richard, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that erased all doubt. Her hand lingered near his chest, his voice low as if confessing something only she could hear. "Elena," Daniel said. His voice cracked, but it cut through the air like glass. They jolted apart. Elena spun toward him, her face flushing with shock. Richard, ever composed, straightened his jacket, his lips curling in a faint smile. "Daniel," Richard drawled, "didn't expect you here." Daniel's chest heaved. "What the hell is this?" Elena stepped forward, hands raised slightly, as if calming a wild animal. "It's not what it looks like." The words sliced him open. He laughed bitterly. "Don't insult me. I've seen the messages, the whispers, every touch you thought I didn't notice." Her expression faltered, guilt flickering before she masked it with anger. "You've been spying on me? You gave me no choice." His voice rose, trembling. "My wife? With him?" Richard's tone stayed maddeningly calm. "Daniel, you're upset. I think we should all take a breath." Daniel's eyes snapped to him, blazing. "You think you can take everything from me? My respect? My career? My marriage?" Richard didn't flinch. "Elena deserves someone who sees her potential. Maybe you've been too busy wallowing in self-pity to notice." The words detonated. Daniel lunged forward, his hand sweeping across the table beside them. A glass shattered against the floor, shards glitter under the dim light. Elena screamed, "Stop it! Both of you!" But Daniel couldn't stop. Years of resentment, betrayal, humiliation. They poured out in a single violent burst. He shoved Richard hard, slamming him into the wall. Richard grunted, his composure slipping as anger finally lit his eyes. Richard shoved back. "You're pathetic, Daniel. Always have been." "Shut up!" Daniel roared. His hand closed around the broken stem of the glass, jagged edges biting into his palm. Elena grabbed his arm, tears streaking her face. "Please, don't!" But the storm had already broken. Richard lunged again, fist swinging. Daniel ducked, adrenaline surging. He thrust his arm forward. The broken glass sliced through fabric, then flesh. A sickening sound. A gasp. Richard staggered back, clutching his side. His eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening as if to speak, but only blood poured forth. He collapsed against the table, dragging a cascade of bottles and crystal down with him. The room filled with the metallic tang of blood, the silence broken only by Elena's ragged sobs. Daniel froze, staring at the crimson spreading across Richard's shirt, at his own hand slick with blood. The broken glass clattered from his grip, shards glistening like accusation on the floor. Elena's scream shattered the stillness. She dropped to Richard's side, pressing her hands against the wound, her dress staining red. "Oh my God! Richard! Stay with me!" Her voice was frantic, raw with horror. She turned on Daniel, eyes wide with fury and terror. "What have you done?" Daniel stumbled backward, his breath coming in shallow bursts. His mind couldn't catch up with his body. He saw Richard's chest rise once, twice, then still. A body on the floor, a marriage in ruins, a life split apart in a single, irreversible moment. The hallway seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. Daniel could hear footsteps somewhere distant, voices drifting nearer. He backed away, his heart hammering. Elena's sobs followed him, her voice echoing like a curse. "You've ruined everything, Daniel. Everything. NG." The party beyond still pulsed with music and laughter, oblivious to the horror hidden just down the corridor. But for Daniel, the night had already ended in blood. And he knew, with bone-deep certainty, nothing would ever be the same again. The music from the party still throbbed faintly through the walls, but in the secluded corridor there was only silence, broken by Elena's sobs. She knelt over Richard's lifeless body, her hands slick with his blood. Daniel stood frozen, his back pressed against the wall, his mind a blur of images. The glass, the scream, the fall. "I didn't mean—" His voice cracked. He could hardly hear himself. "Elena, it was an accident." Her head snapped up. Her eyes were wild, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "An accident?" she hissed. "Do you know what you've done? You killed him." Daniel's stomach turned. The word killed rang in his ears, unbearable. He shook his head violently. No, he came at me, I just... He looked down at his bloodied hands. "It wasn't supposed to..." "Shut up!" Elena's voice was sharp, cutting through his babble. She scrambled to her feet, trembling but purposeful. She looked down the corridor, then back at him. "We don't have time. Someone will come." Daniel blinked, lost. "We should call who?" she snapped. "The police? And tell them what? That you stabbed your boss at a party full of witnesses? You'll go to prison, Daniel. Is that what you want?" Her words hit like a slap. His chest tightened, panic rising. "But it was self-defense. No one will believe that," Elena spat. "Not after the way you've been acting. Everyone knows you've been drinking, losing control. Richard is respected. You?" She let the word hang like poison. Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time, he saw it clearly. Elena wasn't pleading for his sake. She was calculating, her mind racing faster than his. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Listen to me. If we tell them the truth, we both lose everything. You'll go to jail. I'll be ruined. But if we stay quiet, if we manage this, maybe we still have a chance." Daniel's breathing quickened. "Manage this? Elena, there's a dead man on the floor." Her expression hardened. "And unless you want to join him, you'd better pull yourself together." In that moment, their marriage shifted. For years, Daniel had been the steady one, the provider, the man holding everything together. But now he was unraveling, shaking, barely standing. And Elena had become steel. She wiped her hands on the hem of her dress, smearing the blood into crimson fabric. Her eyes scanned the room, sharp, calculating. "We'll say he drank too much," she muttered. "He stumbled, cut himself on the glass. People will believe it. They saw him drinking all night." Daniel stared at her in horror. "You can't be serious." "Do you want to survive this or not?" she hissed. He felt small under her gaze, powerless. His mind screamed that it was wrong, but his body was too weak to fight her. She was already pulling him by the wrist, dragging him away from the corpse. "Go back to the party," she whispered harshly. "Act normal. Don't say a word. Leave the rest to me." "Elena, please!" She turned on him, eyes blazing. "For once in your life, Daniel, do as I say. You've done enough already." The words cut deep, sharper than any blade. Moments later, they slipped back into the glittering party. Laughter, clinking glasses, music. The normalcy was grotesque. Daniel's throat felt tight, his ears rang with phantom echoes of Elena's scream, Richard's final gasp. Elena smiled faintly as she rejoined the crowd, her hand brushing Daniel's as if nothing had happened. She leaned in close, whispering, "Keep quiet. No one suspects a thing." Her calm terrified him more than the blood on his hands. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Daniel barely remembered how they left, how Elena guided him into the car, how she drove them home with icy composure while his hands trembled in his lap. When they reached the house, he collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his palms. "This isn't right. We can't just—" Elena crouched before him, her voice smooth, almost soothing. "It's done. The only choice we have now is silence." Daniel looked into her eyes, searching for the woman he had married. But all he saw was survival, cold, sharp, unflinching. And in that moment, he realized the truth. His wife wasn't just protecting him, she was controlling him. The night had ended in blood. The morning would begin with lies. The morning after the party was a blur of silence. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at his stained hands, the faint smell of blood still clinging to his skin. Elena moved briskly around him, rehearsing lies like lines in a script. "It never happened," she said flatly. "He drank too much. He slipped. That's all anyone needs to know." But the truth has a way of clawing to the surface. By midday, the police were at their door. Detectives spoke with polite firmness, their questions sharp beneath practiced smiles. A witness had mentioned seeing Richard leave the party in poor condition. Someone else had seen Daniel follow Elena down a corridor. The timeline began to unravel. Elena leaned on Daniel's arm as she answered their questions, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "It was a horrible accident," she whispered. "Richard was drunk. He fell onto the glass." Daniel sat stiffly beside her, nodding, echoing her words. But every time he opened his mouth, the detective's eyes lingered on him longer than on her. The investigation stretched on for weeks. Forensic reports revealed glass shards in Richard's wound inconsistent with a fall. Blood patterns suggested struggle. The whispers grew louder. This wasn't an accident. Elena's demeanor, shifted. At home, she was cold, commanding. "You're unraveling," she told Daniel when he couldn't sleep, when he jumped at the sound of the phone. "If you don't keep it together, they'll know. But in public, with police, with neighbors, even with Richard's grieving associates, she became the picture of composure, a widow-like figure cloaked in sorrow. She never said it aloud, but Daniel felt it. She was already rehearsing her freedom, preparing her life without him. The arrest came on a gray morning. The sound of fists pounding on the door jolted Daniel from a half-sleep. Officers stormed inside, their voices sharp, commanding. He barely processed the words. "Daniel Harris, you're under arrest for the murder of Richard Hale," before cold metal bit his wrists. Elena stood in the doorway, her robe cinched tight, her expression pale and stricken. To the officers, she looked like a woman shattered by tragedy. To Daniel, she looked like a stranger. "Tell them!" he cried, struggling against the cuffs. "Elena, tell them it wasn't like that. Tell them what happened." But she only pressed a trembling hand to her lips, eyes brimming with tears. Silent. The trial drew the city's attention. Richard Hale wasn't just a boss. He was a figure of influence, a man with connections and wealth. His death was scandal enough. A murder at his own party was blood for the tabloids. In court, Daniel sat hunched, unshaven, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The prosecution painted him as a jealous, unstable husband, a man eaten alive by insecurity, who lashed out when he could no longer bear the affair unfolding before his eyes. And then came Elena. She took the stand, her voice quiet, trembling. She spoke of Daniel's paranoia, his drinking, his growing temper. She admitted Richard had been a mentor, that perhaps they had grown close, but insisted it was never romantic. Daniel misread things, she said, her tears falling in perfect rhythm. Every word was a dagger. Daniel sat there, unable to speak, watching his wife rewrite the story, turning herself into the victim, and Richard into the saint, and him into the villain. When the defense called him, Daniel tried to explain. He told them about the texts, the whispers, the touch at the party. But without Elena's phone, without evidence, his words sounded like the ravings of a desperate man. The jury shifted uncomfortably as he spoke, their eyes filled not with sympathy, but pity. The verdict was decided long before the gavel fell. Guilty. Daniel felt the floor drop beneath him as the sentence was read. Years stretched before him, decades of bars and walls, a life reduced to shadows. He turned toward Elena one last time. She met his gaze, her face calm now, composed. No tears, no sorrow, only cold finality. And in her eyes, Daniel saw the truth that no jury would ever recognize. She had orchestrated everything. Richard had been her escape, her ambition made flesh. Daniel had been her shield, her alibi. And when blood was spilled, she had shifted the weight onto him without hesitation. Every word she spoke, every tear she shed, was calculated. He was guilty of the act, but she was guilty of everything that led to it. The newspapers painted the story as tragedy: a jealous husband, a faithful wife caught in the crossfire, a powerful man taken too soon. Elena's face appeared in headlines beside Richard's, the grieving widow of circumstance. She sold the house, disappeared from the city, started over. Whispers said she inherited favors from Richard's estate, that she moved somewhere new, reinventing herself once more. Daniel remained where she left him, a cell, a number, a ghost of a man who had once believed in love. Late at night, as he lay staring at the ceiling of his prison, Daniel turned the question over in his mind like a stone he couldn't put down. Was he the monster, the man who snapped? Or was Elena the true killer, not of flesh, but of trust, of loyalty, of everything they had, once built together? The law had decided. But the truth, Daniel realized, was far murkier. Because in the end, Richard's death had destroyed his life. And Elena walked away free, her secrets intact.